May I please invite everyone to rise and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Mr. Ibrahim Patel. The Minister has got major generals and lieutenants. And I see on the left is my big boss, Ms. Doris Tepe, the Commissioner for Competition in South Africa. He is also flanked by Mr. James Hodge, who is the Chairperson's Inquiry. Thank you very much, colleagues. You may sit down. Thank you so much. Just before you walked in, Minister, Commissioner, and the Chairperson of the Inquiry, I was briefing colleagues that the early birds in the media fraternity, Minister, had a rare opportunity of going through the embargoed report. So the report is still embargoed. They have the non-confidential version of the report just to familiarize themselves with the contents of the report, which obviously can sometimes be quite complex, and it is a lengthy report. But one thing I think I want to assure you, Minister, that we are very excited that today we are handing over this report with our heads held high, because it is a report that I believe is going to be owned not only by the Commission, but also by the industry role players, because it has been quite a journey conversation between the Commission, the panel, and the affected parties, but we're happy that we're finally here. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Siyabulela Makunga. I am the spokesperson for the Commission. The Commissioner has sanctioned this event, obviously in terms of Section 43 of the Competition Act, that today she officially hands over the report of the inquiry, which obviously she has received from the chairperson of the panel, Mr. James Hodge. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you officially to this proudly South African moment. It is proudly South African, James, because coming out of a proudly South African weekend, here we are to release a report that is going to change the experience of digital platforms from a business to business level, but as well is going to impact on the South African consumers. What a way of winding down a Mandela Month, which has been very eventful. I do believe that, colleagues, that after interacting with this report, you will definitely see that the Commission continues to make a difference in people's lives. We are aware that with the advent of the COVID-19, digital platforms became very much part of our lives. We're largely reliant on digital platforms in how we order food, how we bought some of the products and services that are in the market, but we do not have an extensive understanding of this market. Hence, the Commission, colleagues, having observed that there may be features that may impede, distort, or lessen competition, the Commission has, in May 2021, launched this inquiry to establish what were those features and how those features can be addressed. So today's event, ladies and gentlemen, is about changing the status quo, but not changing it for the sake of changing it, but creating a change that is going to be a lasting change for digital platforms in South Africa. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Mr. Ibrahim Patel. Minister, we always appreciate and we feel blessed to have you whenever we call on you. with your hectic program, it's not always possible that you become part of us. But thank you very much, Minister, for honoring this event. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me also to introduce to you the chairperson of the inquiry panel, sitting right to my left, Mr. James Hodge, who's also an acting deputy commissioner who was leading a process of the inquiry. To my far left is the commissioner of the Competition Commission of South Africa, Ms. Doris Tsepe. Thank you very much, Commissioner, that we are finally here. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, to take us through the journey of this inquiry and what it means to the Commission and what it means to South Africans is the Competition Commissioner, Ms. Doris Tsepe. Commissioner, please, I don't know if you want to speak from there or you want to speak from, but maybe for the purposes of broadcast, speaking from the podium would work better. Commissioner, please join us to the fore to not only welcome your guests, members of the media. I see here, Commissioner, that there is a Deputy Commissioner. Members of the executive are here. Officials from the Commission as well as the DTIC are also here. Commissioner, over to you.
The Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Honorable Minister Ibrahim Patel, members of the press, the chairperson of the online intermediation platform Market Inquiry, Mr. James Hodge, my deputy commissioners, others, Mr. Hadin Rachisusu and Mr. Bukosiba Akema Jenge, and other members of EXCO, of the Commission, the DTIC members, in particular Ms. Tanya van Millis, who is here, and your other members. And most importantly, the online intermediation platform Market Inquiry team. I wish to take this opportunity to welcome you all. It is indeed a great pleasure and honor for me to be here. As you know, it is a momentous occasion for us because today the Competition Commission Minister is publishing the online intermediation platform Market Inquiry report and will be handing over this report to you as required in terms of the Competition Act. You may all recall that the inquiry commenced in May 2021. The inquiry is intended to focus on the platforms that facilitate transaction between businesses and consumers for the sale of goods and services. Its scope, as you will hear when James speak of the findings and the remedy, its scope was quite vast. It included e-commerce marketplaces, online classifieds, both in the auto and property section, price comparator services, software application in the form of Google and Apple, and other intermediated services such as accommodation, travel, and food delivery. It also included search, in particular, search engines, given their role in directing traffic to these platforms. In terms of scope, it wasn't just only for South African platforms or firms, but we also looked at large global platforms that operate in the South African market. As I said, the completion of this market inquiry is a momentous occasion. Not only in itself, but also because this is the first market inquiry that we have undertaken as the Competition Commission in terms of the amended Act that came into effect in 2019. But it's also the first to delve into the increasingly important digital economy. I just thought it would be quite useful for me to just remind us of what market inquiries generally are and what we intend to do with them as a tool that was introduced into the Competition Act. You will all remember that it is different as a tool to the usual enforcement activities of the Commission. And it typically look at what is the general state of competition in a market and seeks to identify if there are any features in that market which may impede, restrict, or distort competition. Those features may include, in addition to individual firm conduct, firstly, how the market is structured, the business models in the market, supplier behavior, and outcomes that may adversely affect competition. In other words, what we're looking at is a broader set of features which may influence competitive outcomes, even if that is not the intended outcome of the firms themselves within the market. In this way, market inquiries seek to improve competition to the benefit of consumers and the businesses served by those markets. In addition, what the market inquiries do, at least what the Act requires us to do, and was important, as you will see in this market inquiry, is to have regard to the impact of the adverse effect of competition of small and medium enterprise businesses on the market and firms that are owned or controlled by historically disadvantaged persons. It should also consider features which affect the ability of national industries to compete in international markets. As I've said, both of these have been of particular relevance to the current online intermediation platform market inquiry. The Commission has been undertaking market inquiries, as all of you would know, for the past 15 years. But the amendments that came into effect in 2019 brought about some important changes to the market inquiry provisions. Of significance is the ability of the Commission to make decisions rather than recommendations to address any findings on features which adversely affect competition. The amendments, in fact, impose an obligation on the Commission to look for comprehensive solution as a way to respond to any adverse findings that they may find, and ensuring that actions taken to remedy the adverse effects are also reasonable and practicable. Given these new provisions, it was necessary to ensure that there is some appeal process in the Act available to those who have been affected. And as a result, the Act has allowed for parties who may want to appeal the decision of the Commission in the market inquiry to the tribunal where they disagree with such findings and remedial actions. Just coming to the actual online intermediation platforms market inquiry, I think there were a number of reasons why this was selected as the first market inquiry. I think the first one is that it was a reflection of the growing importance of digital economy in the South African market and globally generally. The selection of intermediation platforms specifically reflects their importance in the real economy, impacting on the growth of business activities and jobs in the South African market. As you know, intermediation platforms facilitate transactions between consumers looking for convenience in buying goods and services online. But it also, for the businesses themselves, it's important because they seek to use this platform as a mechanism to reach those consumers. As I've stated above, the inquiry covered e-commerce, food delivery, classifieds, online classifieds, travel bookings, and software apps. The second reason why this election was good and important was that we have seen both globally and domestically that there is a concern that digital platforms are inexplicably concentrated already or prone to tipping in that direction, and that competition law has largely failed to adequately maintain competition in these digital markets. Whilst this is true for global markets, domestically digital markets are less mature, and so early intervention was seen as a means to try and sustain competition in these markets as they matured. The third reason was that there was an additional concern of potential exclusion from digital markets, and this was at two levels. The one was whether national digital platforms will be able to compete and thrive against very large global platforms that are already in areas where they have first mover advantage at our national level. And the second was that that we likely to see exclusion of those who have traditionally been excluded in the market in South Africa, in the economic market in South Africa, and we didn't want for the digital market to suffer a similar fate. And lastly, we thought it was an important reason to have a market inquiry into the digital market, because digital markets because of the combination of market features such as network effects and business model alongside conduct of platforms are likely to lead to adverse effect on competition. And therefore, a market inquiry is better placed as a tool to investigate and address this ecosystem and market features, and to determine comprehensive rather than piecemeal remedies that will enhance competition. As a result, and fairly unique in digital market enforcement, the inquiry scope included not just features that may restrict competition between platforms, but also features that may have an adverse effect on competition between the businesses using those platforms, in particular SMEs and firms owned and controlled by historically disadvantaged persons. Because of the nature of this work, it was key that the process we follow was a fair process. And I just wanted to briefly talk about the process that the inquiry was involved with. It was, in fact, an extremely thorough process, and it ranged, and this was necessary also because it was a broad range of markets that we were dealing with, as I've mentioned. This process included a number of rounds of extensive information requests from platforms operating in these areas, along with submissions on statement of issues, a survey of businesses using these platforms, and this was followed by public hearings which were held in November 2021. Those hearings incorporated testimony and questioning of platforms, including leading platforms in these various areas, but also included testimony from business users on those platforms. It was roughly in a period of 4 weeks in November. What followed was further information requests, and then also submissions of expert and legal reports from various platform and stakeholders. This was then followed by closed confidential hearings over a period of 2 weeks in February of 2022. The inquiry team then processed all this information, all the testimony and the evidence, and released in July 2022 a very impressive provisional report. The provisional report put out our preliminary views of the findings based on the evidence that was provided through submissions and collected during the hearing, and included potential remedial actions that may address those findings. Subsequent to the release of the provisional report, as stakeholders were then given an opportunity to make submissions. And this is a requirement of the Act, as you know, so that the stakeholders would have an opportunity to make submissions to the inquiry team on any issues, be it on the findings or the remedial actions that James will talk about later. Furthermore, the inquiry team continued to actively and extensively engage all those stakeholders beyond those submissions that we had received. And the whole point of these engagement was to seek any additional evidence that the parties were talking about, but to also engage with the stakeholders on the actual findings and the remedial action that were there, to ensure that the remedial actions, that the final findings that we get are robust, and that the remedial actions that we finally put across in our final report are both reasonable and practicable as required by the Act. Obviously, this necessitated a lengthier process than that which we had initially anticipated, but it has resulted in sound findings and appropriate remedial action. And this is reflected in a number of ways, and one of those was that you would have seen, if you went through the provisional findings or the provisional report, you would see in the final report that some of those findings have been dropped, or some of the remedial actions have been altered where necessary following engagement with stakeholders. In closing, Minister, I just wanted to remind everyone that you will recall that I speak not only as the commissioner, but you will recall that I had been appointed by the former commissioner as a panel member on this inquiry prior to my appointment to join the Competition Commission. And what this did, it was to afford me an opportunity to have a detailed first-hand experience of the work of the inquiry team. But it also allowed me to observe the work of the inquiry team and the Commission as a whole, including the interaction of the team with stakeholders. I always joke with the inquiry team that through my experience and these interactions, it made it easy, Minister. You have them to thank for me to agree to take this difficult task that you have given to me. So yeah, so I do want to, Minister, on behalf of the Competition Commission and the people of South Africa, to thank the inquiry team, which was ably led by Mr. James Hodge, and the two principal leading the technical team, Mr. Itumeleng Lusufi and Dr. Haripasad Govender, the head of the administration, Ms. Nolutando Jokazi, for the very high standard of work done on this inquiry and in bringing it to a successful conclusion. I think we need to give them a round of applause. I do think it's appropriate to congratulate them, because in this work, what they've done is they've pushed boundaries, and they have been trailblazers in this area that has not been looked at, even globally. Not only have they been the first to navigate the operation of an inquiry under the new legislation, but have also had to consider the evolution and business model of digital markets in a developing country context. There has been considerable interest in their work domestically, on the continent, and globally. And this has been an appropriate interest, I believe. The analysis and outcomes of this inquiry will resonate with us for the longest of time, even beyond our borders. I also would like to thank the Commission team, including the Deputy Commissioners, who, when called upon to look at this work, gave it their time. It took a long time for the Commission and its team to go through these reports, to look at the findings and the remedial action to ensure, as I say, we have robust findings and remedies that respond appropriately to those. So to you, Hadin, and to Bake, and the entire Commission meeting team, I would like to say thank you. Lastly, I would also like to thank many stakeholders for the manner in which they have participated in this inquiry. In particular, I would like to thank those stakeholders that chose to constructively engage with the Commission on these very complex issues, to reflect on the impact of their business models on the business who use them, and on the economy and the consumers generally, and together with the Commission to seek practical and reasonable remedies to try and deal with these findings, even in instances where they did not necessarily agree with the Commission and their findings. So with those few words, Minister, I would like to say thank you. I will now hand over to the inquiry chair, Mr. James Hodge, to take us through the final findings and the resultant remedial action. Thank you, Program Director, and I hand over to James. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome, Minister and members of the press, and of course the inquiry team and the Deputy Commissioners and other EXCO members. I've got the very difficult task of trying to do some justice to findings and recommendations and remedial actions for what is a vast inquiry. This probably should have been 5 different inquiries, but as we happen to approach it, it is one. We have 5 major platform categories, and we also deal with search as a further category as well. So I'll try and highlight some of the aspects, but I would encourage the press to also look into the detailed report, and I'm sure we can flesh out some of those individual categories in more detail, either in the coming days or through questions and answer. I think the other aspect that's important in an inquiry is actually understanding these markets. And I think it's important for the public to understand the markets as well, because as consumers, we may interact daily with most of these platforms, but we may not understand the back end of what's happening and how our choices may be influenced or impacted. And so certainly I think it's an important part of the process to educate ourselves and the public around these platforms. So whilst the different platform categories are quite diverse, we've got travel, we've got e-commerce, we've got software app stores, there are a number of features that are common across them that bring them together and may offer an analytical framework that may understand our remedies and also our findings. So the first, I think, is that online is distinguished from many other channels for business and sales of these services and goods, simply by the convenience it offers to consumers, and all of you would know that. Your ability to search, select, and transact any time in the day across a wide variety of businesses is what attracts consumers to these. And for businesses, it's a chance to reach national consumers and even international consumers as well through a single platform and the technical infrastructure to achieve that. And that's why they're becoming important, and that's why they are displacing some of the traditional business as well. I think from a platform competition perspective, and we've looked at, as the Commissioner said, a platform competition and user competition perspective, your first-to-scale platforms generally can deliver the bulk of your consumers, and this makes them invaluable to businesses, essentially. and businesses become dependent on them if they are to reach customers in the online world. And this allows those platforms to extract more funds and to fund a virtuous cycle of consumer acquisition, often through Google search as your primary sort of entry into the online world for most consumers, and what we call intent-based search. For this reason, we have included Google search in the inquiry. But the other features that we see are often impediments to either getting businesses to list on other platforms, and we'll see a range of that. So it's either restrictions or other impediments to businesses listing, or new platforms trying to compete for those businesses through lower fees or lower prices to compete for consumers, and that's a world of sort of price parity. So the remedies that you will start to see as we unpack it is trying to open up marketing opportunities for small and also South African platforms to eliminate these price parity clauses and to remove any barriers to listing on platforms by businesses. What we've sometimes done where there is sort of intractable dominance, to also look at how can the business users promote their own online channels as a potential alternative and reduce their dependency. In terms of business user competition, the fact that you've got one or two platforms in most categories that are critical for businesses to reach the online consumer, it does mean that these platforms can influence competition between users through how they price and whether they price differentiate between them, through how they offer promotional opportunities to buy the best ranking on the search page. And we know that's important. We've probably all known from our search experience that being on the first page and being at the top is important, but that actually applies to every platform category. And the evidence we've gathered demonstrates that consumers believe that what they are presented with first is the most appropriate to their search request, and therefore they click on it more often. So that is one aspect of influence of competition. In a few cases, such as in Google and Takealot in e-commerce, the platform actually competes with those that use the platform as well. So you can have conflicts of interest that emerge that need to be addressed. So again, here the remedies you will see look at preventing or limiting self-preferencing behavior where those conflicts exist, addressing price differentiation that often works against smaller businesses, and then support for the visibility and discoverability of SMEs. I think, as the Commissioner highlighted, we do have a lot of thanks for many of the platforms that have constructively engaged and come up with and seriously engaged about what can actually make a difference, but also be practical, reasonable, and not interfere too much with their ability as a business to respond to what is a dynamic market and one that's still maturing. So let me quickly delve, if I can, into each of these categories. Google, as I said, has an influence on platform competition because it is where most online journeys start. And Google does give prominence to paid results, and it also allows for the duplication of paid results and your free, or what they call organic results. And this means that the largest platforms with the biggest marketing budgets can dominate the Google search page for more and more consumers, and also the organic results through the expenditure on search engine optimization. So this business model has the unintended side effect of disadvantaging small, but also South African platforms who have to compete with global platforms that come with rich venture capital funding to put in that marketing budget. So to address this, the remedial actions have focused on improving paid and organic results for the visibility of smaller and South African platforms. So here the remedial actions include that Google must introduce a South African flag identifier on their search page to help South Africans identify local platforms, and also search filter at the top of their search page in order to filter for South African businesses as well. And that'll help consumers who want to support South African businesses to find them easily and elevate them in the search results. They must also introduce a new platform sites unit or carousel that will allow the smaller South African platforms to be displayed at the top of the free results. And lastly, on page results, Google must provide 180 million in advertising credits for small platforms to use in the consumer acquisition and to get that virtuous cycle of customer acquisition and scale. In shopping and travel, this is where there is the additional distortion of Google competes with its customers for consumer attention and has an incentive to try and capture some of that traffic itself. So to address this, the remedial actions has focused on changes for Google search to cease its self-preferencing of its own products. And in the interests of regulatory compliance for Google and oversight by the Commission, Google is required to implement the measures it's taking in Europe under the Digital Markets Act to address self-preferencing in South Africa too. That is for Google. Next, on travel and accommodation, I mean, this is an area I'm sure we've all been booking airlines and hotels for a long period of time, and there are a number of domestic platforms that emerged first over 20 years ago to help South African consumers' domestic and regional travel bookings. But what we have seen is that this space has come to be dominated by Booking.com, which is one of the largest international travel agencies, online travel agencies, and now currently accounts for a majority share of bookings in South Africa. The kind of features that have impeded competition from the smaller South African platforms that still offer that service include the extensive marketing budget on Google, and obviously the Google remedies aim to address that to level the playing field for South African platforms. But it's also the use by Booking.com of price parity clauses. So these include the so-called wide parity, which means that hotels and other establishments which list on Booking.com cannot price any worse on Booking than they do on any other online platform. And this, of course, restricts the ability of other online platforms to compete on price and outcompete Booking as a service offering that might attract consumers. Certainly wide price parity as it is now generally accepted in the competition realm as a hardcore restraint of trade. And Booking has removed this in the European Commission, but persists with applying it in South Africa and most of the rest of the world. They also impose so-called narrow parity, which stops hotels from putting lower prices on their own online channel. And this, in a sense, increases the dependency of the hotels on Booking, but also gives consumers very little reason to go to the direct channel when they can get it at least no worse on Booking and potentially better with loyalty discounts. So again, Booking.com is required to remove both these price parity clauses and inform South African establishments they're open to price as they wish online on their own channels or on others. In e-commerce, there is a clear market leader in terms of Takealot, and other players attempt to occupy niches within the South African market. And it is certainly dominant in terms of online sales more broadly, and an important channel, I think, for marketplace sellers in particular that operate on Takealot to reach consumers who now number in the thousands. So on platform competition, Takealot does also impose this so-called narrow price parity, which prevents those marketplace sellers from pricing lower on their own direct channel. It doesn't impose a wide parity. And much like Booking.com, we require that Takealot, in fact, removes that price parity clause and informs its marketplace sellers of that. While Takealot does operate a beneficial marketplace for many sellers, thousands of sellers, it also trades extensively itself through Takealot Retail. And this does create the kind of conflict of interest in much the same way as Google and probably globally what has been highlighted in the context of Amazon. The inquiry did have extensive evidence from marketplace sellers and investigated much of the claims And as a result, we've looked to find a range of measures to be taken by Takealot in order to address this perceived and real conflict of interest. So the first is that Takealot is required to segregate its retail division from its marketplace operations and to appoint executives for both roles. And it's then furthermore to prevent its retail division and services from accessing seller data, marketplace seller data that provides them an advantage in competing against those that use the platform and who have invested substantially in the innovation and discovery of products that would benefit consumers. There is also the practice of so-called product gating, where Takealot may unilaterally ensure that certain products can only be sold by it on the platform without the supplier's consent and not by marketplace sellers, and that too must cease. In order to also ensure that this the adverse behavior by potentially sometimes just retail buyers that are incentivized through their own commissions rather than necessarily an organizational policy, we also require them to extend the employee code of conduct and also their speak up policy for marketplace sellers to include conduct that harms marketplace sellers and unfairly restricts them from competing. Another area is dispute resolution, where we find that in some instances where the sellers are bearing the cost, that there may not be a rush to resolve these. So the remedy requires that within 60 days, any complaints that are not resolved must be resolved in favor of the marketplace seller, and that would cover things like returns and stock loss. And finally, this is a more technical term, but often you're presented with a buy box which has the fastest delivered product. Now we require Takealot to offer not only the fastest but also the cheapest, as sometimes the cheapest is not in their warehouse but in a seller's warehouse. I mean, there have been a lot of rumors about the entry of Amazon, and it hasn't entered so far, but were it to do so, we do recommend that it also is expected to comply with similar conditions of service, and we will be responsive to that were they to enter. In terms of your software application stores, I'm sure it's not news that the Apple App Store and Google Play Store collectively account for the vast majority of app downloads or revenues in South Africa. Google Play has really achieved this position by being the default on all Android devices, and Apple does not permit any other app store on its own devices. So in this respect, they are unconstrained in the commission fees that they have charged and do charge to paid app developers on their platforms. This is aided by, again, much like the sort of price parity, is aided by so-called anti-steering provisions and rules which prevent apps from directing consumers to their own website where they may be able to purchase content at a cheaper price. So from that perspective, to remedy this, we do require Google Play and Apple App Stores to stop that anti-steering and remove those rules, and to allow apps to direct consumers from their app to their own website, and to ensure that they can continue to use that content for free on their apps on the devices. Again, this finding can be implemented through any measures taken to comply with similar provisions in the Digital Market Act in Europe. Those will be considered as compliance with these remedial actions if implemented in South Africa. The other area, and we heard from numerous small app developers in South Africa, and we were struck by the lack of a more robust and vibrant app ecosystem in South Africa, for paid apps at least. I mean, given that there are millions of apps, literally millions of apps, and probably thousands in any individual category, and it happens to go through 2 app stores, the discoverability and visibility of these app stores is essential if apps are going to actually get traction in the market and compete effectively. And that discoverability happens through two ways. One is the curation of apps, so your editor's choice and those sort of things. And the other is paid search, which are becoming a growing share of the revenue generated by these app stores. But neither Google nor Apple offer a South African curation, despite the revenues they earn in these in our country. And these are done at either a continental or global level only. And so local apps that might be relevant to local consumers are not necessarily curated and promoted in that way. And then because of the single platforms, the role of adverts means that large global apps are more likely to push out the visibility of South African apps. So to address this, Google and Apple must provide a South African specific curation in amongst all their other curations, and provide advertising credits for a period of time to assist South African app developers get more visibility and overcome those barriers. The last two areas, one is online classifieds. I think for anyone wanting to buy a house, rent an apartment, or buy a car, online classifieds are now the go-to place. And in those, probably in in property it's Property 24 and private property that are the leading platforms, and in automotive it's Auto Trader and Cars.co.za. So we found no impediments to platform competition in automotive, but in property, in contrast, there are a number which have prevented other smaller innovative players entering and expanding and bringing competition, which might bring down fees for the business users and bring innovations to consumers. So the first important one amongst these is a lack of interoperability. So the two largest platforms, as well as one of the syndication software providers, PropData, provide about 70% of listings through their contracts with estate agents, and those estate agents cannot interoperate and feed their listings out to other platforms that compete. So the remedy to address this is to, in fact, ensure that interoperability is provided at no fee within a period of time that's technically feasible to put that in place. The second is there are efforts that lock in the spend on these two platforms. So for Property 24, they have multi-year contracts that keep people locked in for 5 years. And to remedy that, the inquiry requires them to immediately put an end to those multi-year contracts. With private property, although it doesn't have the same market position as Property 24, it has managed to lock in basically through the fact that the estate agents and the largest national estate agents have invested in private property, and that locks them into that platform. And the same estate agents that run the regional, the industry body Robosa, that is used to actively promote beyond those to smaller agencies the preference for private property as a partner. So in respect to private property, the inquiry requires the estate agents to divest from private property. Robosa has already, as a result of this inquiry, notified its members that it's no longer endorsing private property solely as the preferred option. The other feature of property and automotive classifiers is extensive price discrimination based on volume. And these differences are not based on cost at all, but relative bargaining power. And the difference in pricing can be astounding. Sometimes SMEs paying 4 or 5 times what the larger estate agencies or automotive groups get charged on the platforms. And this does distort competition because the evidence quite clearly shows that when your marketing budget is gobbled up by high prices, you are less able to promote on the platforms to get the best positions in ranking or get a standout listing, but also your ability to market on many platforms is also reduced. Certainly given that all of them are exercising this. So to remedy this, Property 24, an auto trader must provide a small independent business package where your cost per listing is within 10% of all the larger users on their rate card. And Cars.co is to adjust the pricing of its current entry packages also to within 10% of all the larger. Lastly, in food delivery, again, as consumers, we're well aware Uber Eats and Mr. D are the leading platforms. Bolt Food is another national operator with an international link. And it has emerged recently, but it has a small share. And then during COVID, given the coverage gap of the two largest platforms, a lot of local delivery platforms emerged in the areas such as townships and small towns that were not serviced by the large players and offered an important service to customers and an opportunity for local entrepreneurs who had to overcome many challenges, in fact, to operate in those sort of markets, which are different to the easy, leafy suburbs mapped by Google. What we have seen is both Bolt and the local platforms have been successful in getting independent restaurants on board, but they have extreme difficulty in getting franchisees and restaurant chains to support them, even in cases where there is no other service. And this occurs in some respects because some restaurant chains expressly prohibit their franchisees from selecting what may be in their best interest, local delivery options or Bolt. To address this, the national restaurant chains are prohibited from imposing those restrictions or dictating the choice of food delivery platforms by their franchisees. This does not preclude, though, them setting some minimum standards that are at least not exclusionary in nature, and also negotiating centrally if they so wish to do. The other feature, much like classifieds in delivery, is that there are substantially lower commissions charged by the local delivery platforms and Bolt. And that gives an opportunity for them to have restaurants on board who put less of a menu surcharge and offer cheaper everyday prices on menu items to consumers. And this is in contrast to the business model of the national platforms, which seek to have big promotional and occasional good prices, but charge higher commissions to fund those promotional activity. So what often restricts this from having an effect is that that consumers are not necessarily aware of that. So the remedy that the inquiry requires from Mr. D and Uber Eats is to notify consumers through a pop-up message that comes up periodically that they do charge the restaurants a commission and that menu prices do differ. This will allow and at least educate consumers to look for across platforms to see what may be better pricing overall, both on a daily basis and, of course, in times of promotions as well. We have seen a history of price parity as well, which again means that even if I charge a much lower commission fee, that may prevent restaurants from actually pricing lower on my platform and enabling these smaller platforms to compete. Uber Eats did give in this practice a number of years ago, but we still require them to inform the restaurants that this practice has ended. We have seen globally that often remedies where there isn't a requirement to inform the business users. In fact, the business users continue in the belief that that still applies. So that is required, and Bolt Food, who currently include this practice, must remove that too. There is also significantly differentiated terms of service charged to independent restaurants compared to restaurant chains. And again, this is not based on cost, this is purely bargaining power. And it harms independent restaurants because most restaurants, in fact, just add a surcharge on their menu in line with the commission that they are charged. So if they are charged a higher commission, they are going to be charging a higher relative price compared to their national restaurant chains that compete with them. So to address this, we have engaged the platforms. Uber Eats has already started to experiment with a standardized tiered commission fee structure, and we require them to continue to implement that moving forward. And that provides restaurants with the option of different commission fees associated with different service levels. And our assessment is this does provide a significant benefit to those independent restaurants compared to what was happening previously. Mr. D Food is required to put in place a promotional rebate for the independent restaurants. We had noticed that that the national chains, restaurant chains, are able to trade off commission fee for marketing commitments. This effectively provides that same benefit to independent restaurants and an ability to bring down their fee materially as well. There are a few cross-cutting areas that I also wish to highlight. I mean, the first is transparent advertising. So certainly you'll notice that often on global platforms, if someone has paid for a position at the top of the page, it will be marked by an ad or promoted or sponsored label. And that's not really the case with most local platforms as well. And the Advertising Regulatory Board has moved on this in consultation with the inquiry in order to change their code of conduct to require that those features where you pay for a position or pay for a ranking boost is classified as advertising and must be transparent to consumers. This is also important for consumers because it enables them to make informed choices. As I said, consumers believe that what is presented first is most relevant to their search query. If it's an advert, they should be aware of that. That doesn't stop them necessarily clicking on it, but it does inform them, and that can affect competition. The inquiry on top of that requires that these local platforms put in that change, as the Advertising Regulatory Board is a voluntary organization, and most of these platforms are not part of it. So we still feel the need to impose that. The other is around the historically disadvantaged persons. And the inquiry has identified, and this is fairly consistent across both platform level and at the business user level, that Black South Africans face additional barriers to competing in these digital markets. And it's marked how limited their representation is as platforms and entrepreneurs, but also as business users on these platforms. And the public hearings did engage extensively with, for instance, local delivery platforms that have faced these challenges. Many have tried to overcome it, but it's clear that these challenges exist. So at a platform level, what is apparent is that in venture capital, at the early stage, you need angel investor, which depends on your family, friends, network, and as a result of apartheid, the lack of wealth accumulation means that Black South Africans don't have that same privilege as their white counterparts, and that does result in exclusion. So this is a barrier to even startup level. The venture capital industry, once it takes over at what they call a post-revenue stage, it does not necessarily support Black South Africans in business, as there are no mandates and support in the venture capital industry, or it's limited. So to remedy this, the inquiry recommends that the DTIC minister put in place a startup fund to provide this venture capital finance, and also some of the incubators and accelerators for historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs to enable them to participate in this in this digital economy that's growing so rapidly. We think that this is probably best done through funding the venture capital industry on a first-loss basis, as this will crowd in additional private capital and make the public funding go much further. And whilst we haven't made a specific recommendation to institutional funders, private institutional and corporate funders, we would challenge them to do the same and to look at this quite seriously. At a business user level, the digital platforms onboarding and visibility promotion does favor established businesses. So, for instance, we see in e-commerce that the larger, more established businesses are given priority in onboarding. We see in areas like classifieds and travel, the business models really focus on previously privileged areas where those industries are more vibrant, and to the detriment of ignoring black communities and entrepreneurs. So to address this, we have suggested to leading platforms that they put up a particular program for historically disadvantaged persons that looks at the onboarding, but also promotion of visibility, discoverability on their platform. And what you will see across all the categories are quite bespoke different programs, and they're a result of the fact that we have based this largely on the proposals coming from the platforms themselves. And I must again commend the platforms for recognizing the inequity in the digital economy and looking to find ways to address that. We do think that's also to their benefit because it'll draw in a bigger set of businesses and activity as well. But we have also included a recommendation that the many SME support programs from DTIC and Department of Small Business Development also look to extend funding to assist businesses in onboarding, because sometimes there are investments that need to be made. So maybe to wrap up, and I apologize for the long shopping list, but there has been extensive engagement and inputs from the platforms, and a lot of what you see is a product of that engagement. And as the Commissioner noted, even in the context where they may not agree with us in terms of the diagnostic. And that's why we're comfortable that the remedies that exist are reasonable and practicable. But in addition, these remedies are only imposed for a duration of time, so anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and some are just once-off changes that need to be made. But also included in these remedial action orders is a variation clause. So in case market circumstances change or there's unintended consequences, platforms can vary these remedies, and we can find something alternative that works. So there are options included in the remedial actions that provide that flexibility in dynamic markets. And we have tried, as I said, to not interfere with the general business model and functioning, just to focus on those areas where there is an adverse effect on competition. So we hope that through these remedial actions that there will be benefits to the platforms, there will be benefits to the businesses listing on the platforms and to consumers. We would expect greater visibility and opportunity for small South African platforms to acquire customers through Google search that will enable their growth, and greater platform competition as well, both locally and with global rivals. We would expect more intense platform competition in each of these categories where we seek to address barriers to competition. And that should offer the businesses that list on them and consumers more choice, more innovation, and ultimately lower prices for the businesses that use them. And hopefully, through the remedies around business user competition, we level the playing field for small business selling through these platforms, including fairer pricing and opportunities for gaining visibility and customer acquisition. And lastly, a more inclusive digital economy, both within a global context with South Africa's participation as providers of platforms and not just users of platforms paying fees to global companies, but also for historically disadvantaged South Africans to share in the rewards of a large growing economy as well. So that is, in summary, the remedies. More detail is in the report, and the annexes to the report, which will be available online, which haven't been printed here, have the actual remedial actions in detailed legal form as well for you to look at. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, James. I do apologize for being unfair to you in terms of time allocation. I have already received a notification from the Minister's office that our allocation by the minister's office, we have already gone past that. But thank you very much, colleagues, to the two competent speakers, from the commissioner to the chairperson of the inquiry, James Hodge. I could not have asked for more competent and able speakers when it comes to setting the scene on this report. I think things now are becoming more clearer as to the state of competition in the market, the issues that the Commission has raised based on the broad investigation in a form of this inquiry, the remedial actions. And I do want to abuse the powers that the Commissioner has given to me to say, judging by the level of extensive consultations, including the closed one, James, just towards the wrapping up of the inquiry, we are confident that the Commissioner is going to hand over to the Minister a report we believe is credible, a report we believe is inclusive of the views of the industry, and we are going to do this without prejudice. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. I do wish now to invite back to the podium the Commissioner for Competition in South Africa, Ms. Doris Tsepe, to officially hand over the report. And I believe, colleagues, that this is the moment that you have all been waiting for. Our cameras are getting ready. We are setting up. Because if you miss this occasion, I cannot guarantee you any other opportunity in terms of capturing such a historic moment. Commissioner has already indicated that this is the first ever report that the Commission is going to be handing over post the amendments of the Act that the President made or signed into law in 2019. Prejudice or without prejudice as it is, the recommendations are binding. Commissioner also said there's a room for appeal, but we do think that with the extensive, please come through, Commissioner, to officially hand over the report to the Minister. You might want to say a few words, and immediately after the handing over, Commissioner, we're going to invite the Minister to respond to this important piece of work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director. The few words is I would like to invite the Minister to come.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us for a photo opportunity. Like I indicated, this is the only time that you are going to be able to
thank
this historic. Maybe we should stand here. Honorable Minister, James, please join. Oh, Deputy Commissioner, the Commissioner is inviting you to the floor. If you may, please stand there, the Honorable Minister. James, do you want to be on this side? Remember, you're an independent board, right? Those are commissioners. This is the executive representing cabinet and the president. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now officially handing over the report to the Honorable Minister. But we do have the Honorable Minister is a little bit of a bad cost to say, please take these recommendations to cabinet and say to cabinet that the recommendations that we are putting forward, we do wish to see a policy reform in the space of digital market so as to achieve a more inclusive digital economy. Thank you very much. We now, at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, invite the Honorable Minister to respond. Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us.
I'd like to start first by greeting and acknowledging the Commissioner of the Competition Commission, Doris Tsepe, and the Deputy Commissioners who are present,
staff of the Commission, staff of the department, members of the media. I want to welcome these copies of the Market Inquiry Report of the Competition Commission on Online Intermediation Services. I've been thinking how best to describe the value of the report. I decided that if you use your phone or your laptop or your home computer to buy food or books or stationery or electronic games, or cars and bakkies, or microwave ovens, air fryers, cell phones or televisions, or clothes and beauty products, or gas heaters and solar lights, or you book a hotel, or you get a cooked meal delivered to your home, or you sell or you buy a house, or you use apps for banking, for work, for communication, or for entertainment, or you search for products or services through Google, then this report speaks to you. The report has a number of firsts. It's the first market inquiry report whose findings are released under the leadership of Commissioner Doris Tsepe, and I want to congratulate her for this. It's the first inquiry of its kind to be undertaken by an African country, and indeed by a developing country. And it's the first regulator's report that has identified developing country challenges in online platform markets that it then addresses with remedies. It's the first outcome of a market inquiry under the new legislation passed by Parliament in 2019. The Competition Amendment Act was far-reaching and provides a new legal framework for the competition authorities. In short, the legislation provides that a market inquiry may be conducted to determine whether any feature, including structure and levels of concentration of each relevant market for any goods or services, impedes, distorts, or restricts competition within that market. And so it provides the market inquiry with the powers to make binding findings on firms, make findings on divestiture that require approval by the Competition Tribunal, and in addition, make recommendations on policy to government. The choice of online intermediation services as the focus of the first market inquiry under the new legislation is appropriate. Our world, our economies, our societies are being reshaped by the digital revolution. The new digital markets, hardly known in the 20th century, but now so prominent in the 21st century, has the potential for vast benefits to citizens, producers, and consumers in the ease of trade, the reduction of the cost of transactions, and in facilitating access for SMMEs to markets. But that potential depends on the structure of the new markets and the practices within those markets, which can either realize or undermine that potential. The new platform economies have been characterized by high levels of market concentration, with private companies often playing the role akin to that of a public utility. And in many cases, a single firm or a small number of firms are effective monopolies in particular markets. The practices and outcomes that emerge in these platform economies are not always a deliberate effort to stifle competition, but are in a number of cases a byproduct, requiring measures to address these. So it's not always firms that try to do wrong. It is in many cases firms who pursue the market signals, the technological qualities of what they're dealing with, but whose actions in combination have outcomes that societies have legitimate concerns about. And that is why a market inquiry is the appropriate way to deal with these challenges, rather than a reliance in the first instance on abuse of dominance provisions in our laws, which carry a very different set of remedial measures and the clear implication that a firm has broken the law. By contrast, the findings of a market inquiry does not presuppose a breach of the law, but instead uses the test of structure, impact, and outcomes as key prisms through which to look at a market. Across the world, governments are grappling with the need for a new policy framework appropriate to these new sectors. The challenge we all face is how to retain the dynamic benefits of competition in network industries that are often predisposed to concentration and monopoly. These sectors are also distinguished by unusual investor practices, with lengthy periods of loss-making that secure a large customer base, followed by the rolling out of more services that monetize that customer base, with impacts on competition. Given the ease of providing the business model in different markets, of rolling it out elsewhere, we have also seen the investment and spending firepower that leading global players can bring to local markets, displacing small local players. In the European Union, governments have responded with legislation and regulation. In the United States, there is now a concerted attempt by the competition authorities to develop a new theory of harm through actions through the courts in cases dealing with large digital economy corporations. The work of Lena Khan, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, on the Amazon paradox challenged the idea that consumer welfare was a sufficient or indeed principal lens through which competition policy should be viewed. In the South African case, we have used a flexible instrument, one that is open, transparent, and engaging. This report by the Commission is the result of work that has stretched over more than 2 years, with a formal start of the market inquiry in May 2 years ago. It has taken enormous effort, with many formal hearings and bilateral meetings, thousands of pages of submissions, tons of engagements with affected parties, and a report containing numerous findings and remedial actions set out in 119 pages in the confidential version. In fact, in both versions, 119 pages of carefully argued text. 7 markets are covered in the report, and I've classified them a little bit differently, James. The first one is online search. The other one is travel accommodation. The third is e-commerce in the form of shopping for goods and services. The fourth is software apps. The fifth is online car sales. The sixth is online property sales. And the final one is food delivery services. 12 large companies or divisions of companies are identified in this report, where remedial actions are warranted. 6 are global and 6 are local. Challenges are identified in 7 areas, or what I can call market participating entities. First, supplier firms who use platforms. But second, also small supplier firms who use the facilities of large platform firms. So slightly different challenges and issues that have come out. Third, consumers who use platforms to shop. Fourth, local or small platforms who compete with large platform firms. Fifth, platform owners who compete with platform users, namely their own customers. Sixth, historically disadvantaged persons or small new entrants who face the market power of established platform firms. And finally, franchisees who are locked into arrangements by franchisor agreements with platforms. The report and the findings break ground in a new and fast-changing set of industries. Historically, competition law focused strongly on seller power and monopolies, and to an increasing extent on buyer power and monopsonies. This inquiry looked at platform power and how it's reshaping the competitive landscape. James did an excellent summary of the report. And I was trying to keep up as you were trotting through a considerable effort and piece of work that has been put together. The report itself makes findings and identifies remedial actions in most instances. In one instance, it recommends a divestiture in the online property market that will go through the Competition Tribunal. The value of the remedial actions is worth, in the estimate of the Commission, many hundreds of millions of rands annually that will benefit small businesses and platform users and consumers. In respect of government, it makes 3 sets of observations. First, that in order to develop small, medium, and micro enterprises in digital markets, greater levels of public support will be needed in startup funding, and the report has observations on how to structure the support in order to leverage and influence the mandate of venture capital providers. Second, global platforms, the report says, have the potential of taxation advantages compared to local platforms and may also erode the country's tax base. This matter is being taken up by National Treasury in global discussions around a fairer set of tax practices by multinational corporations. Third, that instead of a piecemeal set of regulations issued under the Competition Act, it recommends that government considers a comprehensive approach. The report is the result of considerable work by a highly dedicated team. It is, as I said, a quality piece of work. It took a number of people working together to produce the report with its findings and its remedial actions. I want to start by thanking James Hodge, the chairperson of the inquiry. James brought deep insights from his background as a competition economist, but also his knowledge and his insights into the challenges faced by small businesses and historically disadvantaged players in markets in South Africa. And James, you've led a team that has produced really an exceptional report. I'd also like to thank the other member of the panel who moonlights as the competition commissioner, Doris Tsepe. And as Doris said, once she started to snack on the online market inquiry, she developed an appetite for the Competition Commission. And she got into the panel before she was appointed, of course, commissioner. I'd like to appreciate and thank team members who've really worked hard on this. Noluthando Jokazi, Itumeleng Lesofi, and Haripasad Govinda. They were able in turn to rely on a number of other people who contributed to this report. Tsegofatso Radinku, Rahma Leona, Donovan Linley, Raksha Darji, Siposetu Tetani, Stabiso Mkwanazi, Apiwe Nanto, Patushetso Manetse, Sivuyise Mtiki, Lumkisa Jordan, Melissa Naidu, Ntlaka Nipo Mbense, Bekita Keke, Nomsa Mukwenya, Zintle Kele. Now, I've wanted to acknowledge each of them, not only because of the obvious point that they've contributed, but also they are part of a team that makes us enormously proud of the quality of work that can come from the public sector. And that needs to be recognized. And we want to encourage more people in the public sector to strive for this level of excellence. I'd also like to thank Deputy Commissioners Hardin Ratshisusu, who played an important role also in the final stages of the Commission considering this report, and Baki Majenge for the always insightful advice that he was able to provide on matters of law. I also want to thank Thembinkosi Bonakele, who was the commissioner when the market inquiry was launched, and who had to think through which sectors out of many, many that he knows Cabinet and government would like to consider. And in many discussions, we narrowed it down, and eventually this was one. And the wisdom of that decision, I think, is clear when you see the kind of results that have come out of this. The report constitutes a thoughtful and comprehensive review of the new sectors, a report that makes us, as I said, proud, an example of strong state capability that can help to promote transparency, access, and fairness in platform economics. The work benefited from high levels of cooperation by a number of the platform firms as well as their customers, which I know would have improved the quality of the final report and should make implementation easier and simpler. I would like to express my appreciation to those companies who shared information, who engaged on remedies, and helped the inquiry in its work, and these included both large global players and local players. We will study the report very carefully and identify ways to implement the recommendations affecting government and support the full implementation of all the findings affecting the industries. Congratulations to the team, and I'm sure you will be relieved the report has now been finalized, the baby has been born. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the Honorable Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. And where does one start, Deputy Commissioner, of saying a word after such an eloquence? The Minister always make our job easier as communicators, for always trying to look for a more simplified version of communicating the message. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, I have time constraints. The Minister is supposed to leave us within an hour. With your permission, Commissioner and the Minister, I wanted us to take a short break because there's been a request from the broadcasters to have a 5-minute interview in the form of a soundbite from the Minister. But at this stage, we're supposed to be doing questions and answers. But I do think that if the Minister is still constrained in terms of time, we can allow him, as we walk him out, to grab that 5-minute with the broadcasters. But if the Minister has got a few minutes, we are happy to open for questions and answers. Thank you very much, Minister. That is very much helpful. Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister has already said that the baby has been born. And the name of that baby is the final report, a credible and reliable report which we have published without prejudice now on our communication platforms, the website. Brasipo is nodding, that is now available on the website. The embargo has now been officially lifted. You may start tweeting. You can start sharing with your colleagues in the editorial news desk. You can start publishing those draft articles that you have been working on for the past 2 hours before the Minister's arrival. Minister, this is a hybrid event. We are joined by the other colleagues online. My colleagues are going to be assisting me with some of the questions that will be coming through the WhatsApp group. We also have got a very good viewership, Commissioner, you would be happy to know, on our YouTube channel. I think this is one of the reports that, in our view, is a report of public interest. You have already made it easier to talk to the implications of this report on our day-to-day lives, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, I just want to remind you of the rules of engagement. This is an event of the media, meaning we are only allowing the media a few minutes of asking questions from my capable panel. I don't have to overemphasize that. On basically specific issues of interest that you would like addressed by the panel. So what it means, you are going to raise your hand, introduce yourself, the media house that you represent. I do wish to limit questions to 2 per person for the first round, hoping that we would not have a situation where, whilst you are addressing the few questions, my time constraints would then catch up with us. Can I please have an indication by show of hands who would like to start? You are number 1, number 2, Togozo number 3, you are number 4. Going, twice, and gone. You start.
Right, thank you very much. My name is Udi from Betweenity. My question is to Dr. James Hodge. You refer to the conditions being imposed for a period of 3 to 5 years. What do you anticipate to change in those 3 to 5 years that will render that period sufficient for purposes of any changes that are sustainable in order to prevent just a delayed tipping of some of the markets? Thanks.
Second question, thank you.
All right. Very good afternoon. My name is Katlego Lerodi from the SABC. I'd like to just go into the timelines in terms of the recommendations that were just put in the report here. And also maybe just get a sense of the penalties that would be imposed here if maybe some of these identified role players in the report don't adhere to some of these remedial actions or the recommendations by the report. What would be the penalties that would be imposed here by the Competition Commission or even the Competition Tribunal? Thank you.
Third question.
And Togozo Kumalo from Newsroom Africa. First question would be on the appeals process. When, can the industry players look to that kicking off? And as well as when we're looking at sectors such as Booking.com, to Dr. Hodge, it's a subscription model for both the accommodation businesses on the platform. How do we then kind of, track and manage that if it is based on subscription? Thank you.
Last question. Yeah, can you please pass the mic?
Good morning. My name is Nick Wilson. I'm a journalist at News 24 Business. This question is actually directed to the Minister, Mr. Patel, if you wouldn't mind perhaps giving us an update on the Shein investigation from the DTRC, because I know Amazon was mentioned in this report saying, there are rumors that they're going to enter the South African market. What applies to Takealot.com should apply to them too, if that is the case. And Amazon, Shein there have been numerous reports about Shein possibly becoming a marketplace itself. And as we know, that quite a lot of the retailers and unions in South Africa are very upset about the manner in which Shein has entered the South African market. And it's actually prompted the DTRC to, in March, confirm that they were investigating business practices of Shein in South Africa. Perhaps an update on that, and also whether this would apply to Shein as well, like it does to Amazon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I do wish us, Nick, to have an agreement. Can I leave that to the discretion of the Minister to answer the question? Is that okay with you? We can always take it outside of the... Okay. I'll leave it to the discretion of the Minister. James, I think the first 3 questions were directed at you. You are more than welcome to invite support either from the moonlighting panel member or members of the technical committee. I have already indicated that the Minister will take liberty whether or not to directly answer the question that has been asked by Nick. Thank you.
Thanks, Sia. So, your question is around the sort of what may change. I think the purpose of putting these remedies in place is certainly that we do see enhanced platform competition and that there will be changes in these market features. And also many of the remedies, although they're imposed for a period of time, I think will often result in more permanent features changes, because to backtrack away from that may be something that business users at least will find challenging. But this is, as the Minister said, I think for us to try and look at a more comprehensive regulatory and legislative structure that can ensure that as we move forward that we continue to be able to implement. We still obviously have the abuse of dominance provisions as well that can be invoked at a later stage. But as with many sort of behavioral remedies, to impose a permanent remedy is also not justified. And so we are looking to more, again, strike that balance, that we can see a transition to a more competitive platform market. Hopefully that takes hold and creates the changes. But some of the changes for business users are likely to be more permanent in the sense of actual practice. Katlego, in terms of timelines and penalties, we have engaged with most of the parties about what is practical. You know, some of the changes require technical changes to systems, implementation of software. Others require designing programs for instance, small businesses, and putting those programs and software in place. So we have taken our cue from the different stakeholders as to what is reasonable and practical. Some are fairly immediate. To remove a price parity clause from your contract can be done very quickly. And certainly we have short timelines for those. But others that require considerable re-engineering, we are looking at longer periods. So some are 12 months to implement. And that's where the detail in the annexures, and maybe the Minister didn't note that we have a load of annexures that take us to, I think, over 600 pages ultimately, and which are available online but not in the printed copy. Those certainly will provide detail for the business users. We've also included a requirement that businesses must inform the business users of the aspects to the audit so that they are there informed, and that helps with also the monitoring. So to also your question around monitoring and assessment, businesses will be imposed. We also would hope that business users that have participated in this or taken interest in this go and look at those orders and see what are the remedies that may affect them and what they can expect and in what sort of timeline. But monitoring provisions are critically important in any remedial action, and that includes not just informing businesses or others of what you need to implement, but also to report to the Commission periodically around what has been implemented. And typically we look at a shorter period where the first remedies, the timelines for the first remedies should be implemented, and then annual reporting after that. I mean, the Commission, if there isn't compliance, the Commission can certainly look to have these remedies imposed and force compliance from companies. I think at this stage it's premature to talk about penalties. And on appeal and the timelines on appeal, the Minister did recently promulgate regulations which set out the processes for appeal on market inquiries. And if I recall, it's 20 business days if you want to lodge an appeal. And then the process is set out in those regulations amongst for the tribunal. One thing I must correct is I'm not a doctor, so please don't put that in your articles. I am just a simple mister. Do you want to go first?
No, James down.
Okay.
So if there's any ambiguity in future about your status, I'm going to call you a humble economist. Well, I think Nick asked a very interesting question, and while it is formally outside the scope of the market inquiry, it still raises an interesting question around competition between digital platforms and physical platforms. It's not only that part, but that certainly is raised in it. And for those who may not be familiar with it, there's an online clothing platform called Shine Clothing, which has attracted a lot of attention in many different parts of the world because of concerns about various of its practices. In the case of South Africa, what we've had is the support for the clothing industry has been based on an understanding that clothing production is very labor intensive, that one way of creating jobs in South Africa is to have a trade policy that supports local production with a set of import duties. Those import duties have to be utilized, and all retailers have to abide by them. But in the past, in order to take into account instances where someone may bring in a small quantity, someone buys a specialist wedding dress from abroad, or brings back from travel abroad small quantities of clothing, a lower tariff was set for what was intended to be modest quantities of goods coming in. Cheyenne, of course, is an industrial scale operation, bringing huge quantities of clothing, but packaged in small amounts. And so, as in all legislation and regulations, we find as we implement it that parties utilize it in ways it was not intended. So that's a little bit of the background for those who may not know what Nick was talking about. So the DTIC is looking at the impact of these practices on competition in South Africa, specifically in the context that we have a master plan for the clothing, textile, and footwear industry, that this is an important generator of jobs locally, and an anomaly or loophole in the customs duties is now being utilized on scale. As soon as this has been completed, we will be engaging with parties and making a decision thereafter. So it is being looked at the moment, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for taking that question, which obviously is outside of the scope of today's discussion. Now we are familiar with the case, Nick. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is now the last round of questions. I've already indicated that we have got time constraints. Can I please have an indication if there is more questions coming from? I know on WhatsApp there are no questions. My colleagues have already updated me. Katlego, can I please have a mic for Katlego, colleagues?
Thanks,
Sorry, Katlego, I take it, colleagues, that's the last question for the day. Oh, Nick. One follow-up, we are going to come back to you. Not on that matter, Nick. I have reservations in deviating the discussion. Can we take it outside, please, Nick? We can arrange. We can arrange. Please proceed, Kata.
All right. Yeah, mine is also to the minister. I'm not sure if he'll be able to take it here, but it's on one of the recommendations around the support in venture capital, where then the department will need to ensure that there's support given to smaller businesses, and also a talk around fairer tax practices and just a comprehensive approach in terms of support going into this digital space. Is this something that maybe the department has really been inundated with from those that are players in this space for support, where then we will use this report here to say that indeed then there's a need to look into this digital economy and those players in this space, and really looking at the tech space as well. Concerns really, we know very well that there have been concerns around the tech space, especially for big businesses and their responsibilities here. Is this something that maybe we'll see you using this report to ensure that there's compliance also on that end, working with SARS and other entities or departments within government? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katlego. Just before the minister responds, there is a question from Loni Prinsloo from the Bloomberg. James, if you may, please address the question.
Thanks. Yes, so the question from Loni at Bloomberg was what is meant by the unit that Google has to produce. So I'm sure we're all familiar with Google, and you will see, if you search for a hotel, you will see often the carousel at the top, or when you're searching for shopping, you'll see a carousel at the top. You also have, and that is a form of a unit that is produced by them, and sometimes you'll see where it invokes a map. If you're looking for a local business, you again have a unit. So what this involves is, for instance, taking that shopping example, that unit would populate with South African platforms relevant to that, and the same with travel. These are similar to the kind of remedies being explored in the European Commission, but in South Africa there will be the additional factor of at least ensuring that local platforms get that support and it's not just populated with global platforms.
So, Katlego, starting with the tax matter, as I indicated in my remarks, National Treasury is dealing with it. There has been discussions by a number of countries globally to deal with the tax practices of multinational corporations. And there's an emerging consensus by particularly OECD countries, but also much broader than the OECD, for a reform in this area. Now, I have many problems in my portfolio. I don't also want to take on the problems of Minister Godongwana, so I have deftly moved the matter to him to deal with. So National Treasury will then drive the process. We were alerted to the problem before the market inquiry findings, because it's not limited only, the overall problem is not limited only to online platforms, intermediation platforms. But obviously what the work of the Commission has done is provided National Treasury with additional insights and additional information. And that's the important role of the Commission, that it helps to provide information to all of government. And so whilst I would typically be its most avid reader of its documents, many of my colleagues have been shall I say, studious in their reading of the market concentration report, for example. So I make that comment really to emphasize that what a market inquiry does, it provides information to the DTIC, but also to all of government. On the matter of venture capital funds and the broader issue of support, I'd start off by saying that the DTIC already has at the moment some funding arrangement. We've got this program that we call the SPII program, which is it's a program, a support program for industrial innovation that can be used to try to build capabilities of small businesses and medium-sized businesses in online platforms. But what the Commission has done, it's pointed to the need for scale. It's engaged with the National Empowerment Fund, which is one of the agencies of the DTIC. It's also recognized that there are already arrangements that the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation, is partnering in. But if South Africa is going to make a serious inroad in this very important set of new activities out there in the economy, digital markets, then we've got to be able to scale it up. I think it's a good observation. I support that observation, and it's something that we as the DTIC will be taking forward.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this momentous occasion. And maybe before the Minister leaves us, we do wish to assure the Minister that this is a flagship baby that we want to take care of. And one of the things that we want to do as the Commission is to make sure that we have an ongoing engagement sessions with our stakeholder community in a form of business fora, the labor unions, community-based organizations, just to ensure that the message does not end here. And the chairperson of the inquiry and the Commissioner have made an undertaking that where possible, they will be available to make sure that those interactions do take place. Ladies and gentlemen, we have made provisions for one-on-ones interviews. You can speak to me. I'm assisted by Prasipo Ngwema and Bongani. I don't know if Bongani is here, Bongani Lukele, but we've already made a special request to the Honorable Minister to give us a 5-minute interview for all the broadcasters in the main who wanted to do a live crossing. Thank you very much. And at this stage, may I please invite you to please rise as we see the Minister out of the small building. Thank you.